record of 5-20. Ouch. As you're looking for some positivity with the team, you're in luck because this new book is out on the life of legendary first baseman Tony Perez. Tony Perez, from Cuba to Cooperstown, shares the experiences of his life and career. It was written by former Enquirer sports writer John Erardi, and John joins us now. John, I have been reading this book and thoroughly enjoying it. It is not what I expected. Because you were able to write this biography without talking to Tony directly for this book.
Correct.
But it's still fascinating how you are able to encapsulate his life.
Yeah, it was interesting because when I got to the airport in Havana, I was talking to the cabbie riding into the town, and he said to me, "What are you here to do?" "I'm doing a book on Tony Perez." He says, "Who?" Yeah. I said, "Okay, Tony Perez." He says, "Tony who?" Nobody in Cuba knew who he was except the people in his own hometown.
Well, that's fascinating to me, that a guy who's in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, who may be the third best player to ever come out of Cuba, is not as well known in his home country. But that's because of politics and that sort of thing, which you kind of point out.
Yeah, in fact, when I talked to Tony after the induction ceremony in 2000, I said, "Was there any mention of this in Cuba?" And he went like this to mean that's how much mention he got for being the only Cuban major leaguer in our National Baseball Hall of Fame, all because Castro restricted the news of Cuban ball players in America.
Yeah, now I've not finished the book quite yet, but from what I can tell, this is very much a story of how a person is more than just a set of skills and that sort of thing. It's very much a product of his place and of his time, and how those influences it made him the ball player that he is.
It's interesting. One of the pictures in the book is of Tony and his wife taking citizenship in the regular season of '72.
Right.
And his two sons are there with him. They were both born here, so they're American citizens. But the point is, after that season, Tony went back home to see his family again. He hadn't seen them in 9 years.
Yeah.
He left in 1963, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and because of the cutoff of flow of people back and forth, he could not see his family. They never got to see him play a single major league game, not even a professional game. So it was a big break, and that, I think, is why Tony was really so affected by being separated like that.
Yeah. Why did you want to do this book?
Well, number one, because as I mentioned, the cabbie didn't know who he was, and I knew right away, as soon as I got there, it was going to be a blank slate. But I felt most importantly, a book had never been done on him, which blew me away, because in my mind, he was the most important Big Red Machine player.
Right, you were talking about how he was really popular, and the team kind of coalesced around him in terms of leadership.
Yeah, and Sparky Anderson, the manager, always would say to Tony, "Tony, it's your clubhouse. You make it right. I'm just the manager. You straighten it out in there." And Tony was the guy. And I've always said, if you can be a leader in two languages, which Tony was, Spanish and English, you're a heck of a man.
Yeah, this book also, it seems to me, was a journey for you as well, because you talked about how you envision Cuban baseball and how spending time there and learning about their baseball players, it totally changed your mind about Cuban baseball too.
It did, because when I began the book, I thought Cuban baseball had just ripped off our game.
Yeah.
I mean, it was our game since Cincinnati in 1869.
Yeah.
But the point is, they brought an exuberance to it. And anybody that saw Aroldis Chapman do that double forward roll off the mound, that is Cuban baseball. It is totally exuberant. It's a lot of fun. The fans are into it. So I think if you blend the two games, which we're starting to get back to, I think you got a better game.
All right, John, thank you so much for coming and talking about your book. It is Tony Perez, From Cuba to Cooperstown. If you're a Big Red Machine fan, if you're a Tony fan, Tony Perez. If you're just a fan of baseball in general, I would recommend that you go out and you read it. It is much more